Hello and welcome to this video on the best way to steep tea. Do you dunk your tea bag in a cup of boiling water or let it gently steep? The former is considered improper among some brewing circles, whilst others simply want to finish brewing their drink as quickly as possible. This means the proper method is hotly contested. There are a number of types of tea available: black, oolong, white, and green, to name a few. These four in particular all come from the plant Camellia sinensis. The difference between each has to do with when they are harvested and how they are processed. In particular, the darker the tea leaf, the higher the oxidation or fermentation of the leaves is. Black tea is completely oxidized, oolong partially, and green and white teas are unoxidized, meaning the leaves are as close to natural as possible. The difference between white and green tea has to do when the leaves are harvested. This ultimately does not particularly affect the decision as to which method you use when brewing, but it will alter the profile of the relevant compounds in your cup of tea and the final flavor. The reality of brewing tea has to do with how much of the contents of the tea leaf you are extracting. You are effectively creating a dilute solution of the flavor profile of your tea leaf. This can be as much as 1 to 100 in ratio terms. This is why brewing patiently is important. Jiggling a tea bag around for 15 to 30 seconds is only going to extract a small fraction of the total compounds in the tea leaf. This has to do with the total volume of water and the total volume of the tea leaves. You can only extract so much so quickly in boiling water in that time frame and volume. If you were to steep your tea leaves for 2 to 3 minutes, or 6 to 12 times as long, you would begin to extract substantially more. For example, with black tea, you would get about 60% of the catechins, 75% of the caffeine, and 80% of the l-theannine. The longer you brew tea leaves, the better. This is arguably why brewing in a pot is better than a cup. Some research has found that allowing the tea leaves to steep for between 20 and 30 minutes at about 80 degrees centigrade will extract and saturate the water in the teapot. The reality is that for most people, you have no desire to wait up to half an hour for your cup of tea. It's also likely to contribute significantly to more stringent flavors such as tannins. Further to the time required, the pH of water has a substantial effect on the extraction of flavor compounds from tea leaves. Low pH water will extract more bioactive compounds than a high pH water. This has to do with the polarity of water and that of the flavor compounds in your tea leaves. Adding a slightly acidic compound like lemon juice to your tea lowers the pH just a fraction. This is helpful in extracting those flavor compounds and creates a slightly more balanced profile that is generally considered better tasting. When you are making your tea, you need to submerge the tea leaves in hot water. Boiling water is best as it causes the tea leaves to expand slightly. This increases their permeability and more readily dissolves the components of interest in the tea leaves. This is also why you do not use cold water for a relatively practical extraction. This hot water will help to dissolve the components of interest in your water and is essential, regardless of whether or not you dunk or steep your tea. There is an argument to be made that dunking is better than steeping. As a rule, exciting the tea leaves causes the molecules inside to become slightly more excitable. This creates a flow of the compounds of interest, and they diffuse into the cup. As they diffuse, there is more reason for the flavors to leave the tea leaf and enter the tea itself. Arguably, this is true. It is generally held to be consistent across most compounds that are being extracted. But remember, you are extracting at a relatively high rate. 1 gram of tea leaves per 100 milliliters of water, or 1%. Unfortunately, there is one caveat to this idea. Not all compounds will be extracted at the same time, in the same concentrations, and diffuse as effectively. This means that even though you are agitating the tea bag in the tea cup, you may not necessarily be extracting all of the desired compounds. As an example, tannins will more readily dissolve in water. These are what give your tea its stringent taste. Being high in astringency, you obviously want these to be relatively balanced, unless that's what you like. In order to get that effect, you don't want to overly agitate the tea bag if possible. Then you need to consider the quality and manufacture of the tea leaves. As a rule, loose leaf tea uses more of the leaf and less of the stems and stamens. This means they tend to be higher quality. However, what goes into a tea bag is generally cut much smaller. This increases the surface area to volume ratio and, as a rule of thumb, will increase the extraction process efficiency. When compare this to lower quality tea, they may include the previously mentioned stems. These have higher l-theannine, and, as a result, you may find you get more flavor from this, compared to the high quality tea leaves. So far, this provides no specific solution to which option is more appropriate, and to muddy the water further and to horrify tea puritans, you can try the following. Microwave your tea. By adding boiling water to the teacup, let this steep for 30 seconds. This both saturates the tea leaves and helps to open them up and make them more permeable. After it has been steeping for 30 seconds, you may begin the bastardization of making tea by microwaving it for 1 to 3 minutes. This does a number of things. First, many microwaves move in a circular motion, which in turn imparts a tidal force to the teacup, causing the tea to diffuse more readily. Second, it maintains the temperature of boiling water. And third, it both steeps and dunks the tea leaves in the tea bag. By holding the teacup in a relatively stationary position, the tea bag itself is steeping, whilst the motion within the cup of the water is similar to the motion of dunking. To put this all in context, when you are deciding whether or not you will dunk or steep your tea, there are a number of things to consider. Dunking will mix the tea, which creates a relatively reduced concentration of tea extract around the tea bag itself. This leads to more of it being dissolved in solution. 2. When the tea bag and as a result tea leaves become wet and hot, they will float to the surface. This means that the tea that has become saturated in the tea cup will sink to the bottom. This means you get a hotter extraction as hot water rises to the surface, where there is a slightly lower concentration, and cold water sinks to the bottom, taking flavor away from the tea leaves. This creates circulation and results in what could be most appropriately described as a slightly heavier tea flavor. If you keep your tea bag on the bottom of the teacup, you will find it produces both a stronger flavor initially, but overall a more balanced flavor, as those components that are unable to be extracted as quickly will eventually reach a balance with those that were extracted more easily and that can no longer come out due to an equilibrium between what is in the tea leaves and what is in the tea itself. Depending on your local water supply, hard water, which is that high in minerals, will not create as strong a flavor since it cannot penetrate the tea leaves. Soft water, on the other hand, can more effectively extract the flavor. Next, a small tea bag will not be able to extract, as the tea leaves will swell and water will be unable to get to the inner part of the tea bag, resulting in only a superficial extraction. If you are using a lighter tea, such as green or white tea, adding boiling water will cause it to burn. This means that you will not extract anything, given that the outside of the tea leaf becomes cauterized. This results in a weaker flavor. Altogether, there are several articles that seem to indicate that steeping and dunking does not produce any significant difference, but they all also seem to refer back to one is not a significant proof of concept. However, this could all just be a case of keeping yourself occupied while you produce your tea, and the motions of dunking the tea bag may do exactly that. It could also be a case of something similar to smoking, where nicotine has an effect for those who are stressed of helping them to relax, and for those who have been relaxed either due to being tired, fatigued, or otherwise worn out, helps to motivate them and give them energy once more. Ultimately, you may find that not just the style of tea that you are choosing, but your local water and how you choose to make it will alter the flavor. It could also mean that there's very little difference if you are using tea bags that have very little variation and or your water is relatively consistent. This means there's no definitive answer, depending upon how much of a Puritan you are. There is a limited case to be made that at the volume of a teacup, you are unlikely to observe any significant difference in the concentrations of the flavor compounds from your tea leaves. The caveat to which is that expectation and experience may create a cognitive bias, meaning that if there is no quantitative or meaningful difference in measured and objective fact, there may be an experiential difference. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting or useful, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.